I'm going to turn this guy on. And then I'm going to wake up the computer here. If I'm lucky, just tapping the space bar is going to wake it up. If not, if nothing happens after like 60 seconds and it's clearly been turned off, I can reach back here on the bottom left corner and find this little button. But it woke up. So I'm going to log in with my credentials. Okay, so I've logged in to the computer. I'm just going to open up Pro Tools. Remember, we have this little 3-ring binder with introduction on the cover sitting over here that if you haven't flipped through this book, you're going to want to. You're going to want to. It's only a few pages, but it has so many things that you're going to need to be able to reference. And I'm going to assume you've done that already. So I'm going to create this new project. Now, if it doesn't open up Windows, I can always come up here to the window menu and I can click on both the edit and the mix options to make these windows show up. I've noticed that sometimes these windows don't show up even though Pro Tools is open. So you want to open the mix window and the edit window. So here I am. I've got my project. I'm going to go to Track, New, and I'm going to go ahead and make a stereo master fader. And I'm going to make, let's say, let's just say 8 tracks of audio. And just in case I want to get fancy, I'm going to make 4 stereo instrument tracks. So here's what I've got. 8 audio tracks, mono, 4 stereo instrument tracks, and 1 master fader. I'm going to say create. And now they are all up here. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to come back up to track and I'm going to come down to the bottom and it says click track. I'm going to select the click track. And that's handy because it's going to let me be able to dial in tempo. And I think I want to set my tempo to something. This little dude right here I can bring up by going to the window and clicking on transport. And then I can keep my transport window ready to go. That's also where my tempo is. It just so happens to default to 120. Well, that's actually where I want it to be. I want it to be at 120. So what I'll do now, I'm going to use a electric guitar and I'm going to plug that guy straight into the channel 9 preamp here in the front. And I'll show you what that's going to look like. But before I do that, I'm going to come to my first channel, audio 1, and I'm going to switch the input to 9. That means that when I plug something into 9, it's going to be looking for it right there. Now we're going to go over here and set things up on the left side. Alright, so as you may remember, I don't need to turn this stuff over here on at all unless I'm planning to use a microphone or use a guitar or a bass or something and I'm planning to record a real instrument. I am. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. And I'm going to do this the simple way. There's nothing wrong with doing it the simple way. Unless you just don't want to. You don't get extra points for doing it the hard way. So I'm going to show you how to do it the simple way. I'm going to record an electric guitar. I'm going to plug into channel 9 right there. Since this is an electric guitar, because it's an instrument cable, not an XLR cable, I do not need to go into the snake. In fact, when I plug it in here, it defeats the input that's wired coming from the snake. And I would have to unplug this guy if I wanted to use a mic going into channel 9 on the snake. As long as the 1/4 inch is plugged in here, then that is the input. Alright, so I'm going to plug this into the guitar. Okay, so you're going to notice over here on the first audio track, I've already set it to input 9 under the I/O, which is input-output settings. Most of these tracks default to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can rename any of them to anything to send whatever input you want to whatever track. So we kind of talk about starting on channel 9 a lot because it's the first one that's not running through extra equipment, no EQs in the way, no hardware EQs or hardware compressors, just straight in, nice and simple. So I've got channel 1 set to A9, or simply input 9. And then I've got this little flashing light clicked, which puts it into a record enable mode, and that lets me hear whatever I want to send through the speakers. And I've got this guy turned up to about 65%. Now the great thing about plugging an instrument like an electric guitar or an electric bass or an acoustic guitar that has a pickup, if you're plugging straight in with your instrument cable, there's no microphone that's open in the room at all. That means I can run the speakers loud and hear my source and be in the same room, and there's no feedback. There's not a situation where the microphone picks up the speakers and then starts to feed back. If I was using a microphone to do this, it would be much trickier, and I'd have to worry about the microphone picking up the speakers. Well, there's no microphone involved. It's just the electric guitar pickups, and they're not going to pick up the speakers. So what I can do with this type of situation is super easy. I can sit here and actually monitor over the speakers while I record. It's about as easy as it gets. I'm going to go ahead and do a little recording now. Now I'm going to go play a little bit of my click track. So I want that click track to play because I want to be able to record to the rhythm grid that Pro Tools lets me record to. It's going to give me some options that I won't have if I don't use it. And again, the click's not going to be there because this electric guitar is not going to pick up the click track either. I can go back and put a virtual guitar amp on here after I'm done recording. In fact, I could even put one on now if I wanted to hear distortion. If I wanted to get the tone that I will end up, if it helps me play better to hear the tone, especially if it's like a real hard thing, I could put a plug-in on and dial up a distortion and monitor that way as I played. Some people would need to do that. What I'm playing today, I really don't need to do that. That's just my choice. Now the next thing I've got to do is I want to put a vocal on here. The vocal means I am using a microphone, and that means that I'm probably going to want to pull the speakers down really, really low. I might even turn them off if I'm going to be recording here in the same room. And if I'm recording myself, it's just easier to do it here in this room. So the question would be, okay, well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm not going to turn the speakers all the way off. I'm just going to pull them down pretty low on this master bus here. So they're really, really low, but there's still just a little bit of volume. And that's all I need then when I plug my headphones into this little HD native box to be able to crank the volume up over there. So the speakers aren't totally off, but they're really, really low. If they were totally off, then the volume to this box would be totally off. So they're up a little bit. I plug in here, punch this button to turn it to green, and then here's my volume now on this guy. So I'm going to play this and see what my volume sounds like through my headphones now. Okay, I've got the volume almost maxed out. It's probably at 90%. It's as loud as I need it to be, though. I don't need it to be any louder than that. I'm getting plenty of volume in my headphones. And this means that I'm going to be able to set up a microphone and sing in this room without the speakers being too loud for that. The speakers won't bleed into the mic enough for it to matter with them turned down this low. So I'm going to look behind me here on the shelf next to all the folders, and I'm probably going to take this large diaphragm condenser mic out. I'm going to set it up on the mic stand that we have over here next to the snake, and I'm going to connect it to channel 10 on the snake. Alright, so we're looking back down here at the preamps, and we've moved from channel 9. I turned it back down. It's like I was never even there. Channel 9 is back to 0 and nothing's turned on. Right next to it though, channel 10, you'll see that the little red 48 volt phantom power indicator is turned on. That's because I've plugged in the condenser microphone. We'll take a look at that condenser microphone here, but before we do that, notice that the gain is turned up pretty high, 75, 80% maybe. That all depends on how loud I'm going to be singing, but let's take a look real quick at this setup. So my headphones are going to be connected to that little box, the little HD native box to the right side of the computer. Makes sense for me to be standing close by, so the microphone is set up over there. The microphone has a little pop filter connected to the stand, and that's just to keep my plosive P's from popping the microphone too much. So here's where the mic is plugged in to the snake on channel 10, and then of course we've got the phantom power turned on the corresponding preamp input. Now here you'll see that I've got the first track set up on input 9 and the second track set up on input 10. I didn't have to do it this way, I just kind of chose to do it this way, but that's how it works. And I've got the record enable button turned on for track 2 now. And when I come over here and check my mic, you will see it jump a little bit. Mic check, 1, check, 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 check. One thing that I want to point out is that when you start overdubbing, which means stacking one part on top of another, it's usually a good idea to come over here to the playback engine, which is under setup, and make sure that your hardware buffer size is set pretty low, like maybe 32 samples. If it's not set low, you're going to have a delay in what you're hearing. The other thing I'd like for you to do is come over here and click on the I for input monitoring. When I am overdubbing, the I needs to be on the track that I'm recording if I'm going to hear it. It's kind of a weird, quirky thing. Just having the record button on won't do it. The I needs to be on as well so that I can hear myself in real time. Not something that has to happen the first time you record, but if you're playing something back from the computer and recording at the same time, that's the way it has to work. One thing you may want to watch out for is whether you've got your count off set. In this case, if I want to count off for 2 bars before I come in, I can turn that on. If I don't want to count off at all, if I want to just start right from wherever I've left the cursor, I'll turn that guy off. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of my project here. I'll click the record button and that's going to start flashing. Once I click the play button, then I'll actually be recording as well.
I used to think that our relationship was cool. You played the role I haven't since I always played the fool. Now something's different. I don't know the reason why. Whenever we separate, I almost want to cry.
Alright, I'm going to shut things down now. I'm going to turn my gain all the way down to off. I'm going to press this 48 volt button to turn the phantom power off. And I'm going to give it about 10, 15, 20 seconds to drain out of the system before I disconnect the cable from the microphone and put the microphone back on the shelf. Disconnect the cable from the snake, wrap it up nice and neat, and hang it back on the microphone stand so the next person that comes in has a nice, clean studio that looks like it's just been zeroed out, ready to work.